In organisational life, concepts often go through a fad or a hype cycle when there's a rush to action. Building employee resilience within the workplace seems to be taking this course. What happens during a hype cycle is that consultants, both in-house and externally, need to respond quickly to a newfound appetite by managers for exploring a new approach. The demand, combined with an urgency to take up the new offering, results in us drawing on existing knowledge. Even worse, programs are reoriented or just rebadged. In the area of work resilience, this has involved concepts, theories and models, predominantly from clinical and positive psychology, and sometimes occupational stress, being repackaged and offered as programs, workshops or even interventions. Emotional intelligence, a highly valuable area for personal development, is a good example of an area being rebadged as emotional resilience to meet this need. In the meantime, the researchers are in catch-up mode, working out what resilience actually is within the work environment and what works and what doesn't. The lag between the popularity of the concept and the science can create a void that's filled with quick fixes. It's not surprising then that desired outcomes have often not been achieved and that managers, especially those in the occ health and safety space, are starting to feel they've ticked resilience off the list. It didn't achieve what they wanted and they need something new to come along. The only trouble is that while the hype cycle is coming to an end, the need for resilience remains. We still have people struggling with pressure, uncertainty and turbulence, whether they're driving a taxi or leading a multinational corporation. The need for resilience is real and palatable. Writing off resilience because we've done it or it didn't work is high risk. So where do we start if we want to tackle resilience effectively in our workplaces? Well, the best place to start is with a definition of what resilience actually is. There seems to be two emerging themes here. One is about expansion of the definition, and the other one is about renaming resilience. Let's talk about expansion first. When you mention resilience to the majority of the population, they think of bouncing back from a setback. This narrow definition has created problems in organisations. The simplistic debate I've heard is that we should be bouncing forward, not back. The more worrying trend, though, is people rejecting the notion of resilience entirely. A colleague contacted me recently to say that a very persuasive consultant had suggested to their executive that they didn't need resilience at all, as it was all about bounce back. Instead, they advised buying their program, which was, in essence, resilience, but renamed to differentiate their product in the marketplace. I would suggest that we move away from simplistic definitions and instead of looking to the clinical literature, we define employee resilience in line with how organisations see what they are hoping to achieve through building it. In my experience, this tends to be partly about managing pressure and uncertainty, but predominantly about being adaptive to change and being able to thrive in the so-called new VUCA environment. In light of this, we define employee resilience here at Working with Resilience as the capacity to manage the everyday pressures of work and remain healthy, as well as rebounding and learning from unexpected setbacks and being adaptive in a proactive way. It's also finding work that's matched with our strengths, purpose and values. Overall, we see resilience as being sustainable performance. That is, performing optimally while maintaining a good level of personal well-being. One without the other doesn't work. The next aspect of resilience is a trend to rename it. One of the ways to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, as I've already mentioned, is to come up with a new concept. Practitioners aren't the only offenders, as academics also like to be the originator of a body of work. The difficulty in organisational behaviour is a lot of the so-called new concepts are not new at all. Emotional agility is a good example. I'm not sure how much this differs from the theory underlying acceptance and commitment therapy, yet it's seen as groundbreaking and different. The cynic in me sees that possibly we're going to have a whole range of programs being developed to build our emotional agility. I propose that we stay with the word resilience. It resonates, it's solid, and if we define and build it appropriately, it will continue to resonate with the people we serve. So this takes me to my next point, which is what constitutes good practice in resilience building in workplaces. Possibly the least effective approach is to invite an inspirational speaker to teach resilience. There's no doubt that we need role models and inspiration. We also need a reality check that any one of us is vulnerable to burnout. What we won't get out of this, though, is a roadmap to help ourselves. Every person's opportunities and stories are unique to them, and we can't expect to replicate someone else's strategies and story. All we can expect from a speaker is inspiration, insight, and some tips that may resonate. The most common terminology used when we promote an approach is to describe it as evidence-based. But what does that actually mean? Every week I see different versions of this. The gold standard of research is, of course, the randomized control study. These are so rare that in a review by Robertson and colleagues in the Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology, they found that between 2003 and 2014, there were only 14 studies that investigated the impact of resilience training in the workplace. They also found that many of the measures used were inappropriate for work settings. Since this paper was published, my colleague Shane Rogerson in Queensland has added to the evidence using our Resilience at Work scale, and I expect that many more will be in the pipeline as the researchers catch up with the demand, addressing the lag issue that I've already mentioned. Many resilience strategies, often offered as evidence-based, seem to be a collection of concepts that have a research base. Typical examples I've seen involve taking concepts from positive psychology, such as gratitude, flow, strengths and grit, and putting them together in a program. Yes, these concepts have strong research that they improve personal well-being and happiness, but does applying them in a menu approach to the workplace make sense? We are now seeing a rejection of what is cynically being named as happyology and an emerging second wave in positive psychology that recognises its early limitations. At work, we need to take a strengths approach while still addressing problems such as the high workloads that people are experiencing. Other approaches to resilience I've witnessed involve taking clinical therapeutic approaches such as mindfulness or cognitive behaviour therapy. We've seen CBT, for example, offered as mental toughness training and a huge uptake in mindfulness training. Is it an employer's responsibility to build these capabilities, and does it just increase the tipping point for burnout if we just invest in these areas without addressing the sources of stress? I'm not sure the answer to this, but the question needs to be asked. While we certainly need the controlled randomized studies, we also need to move to an approach which is not just research-based. Professor Rob Briner in the UK is leading discussion around evidence-based management. This involves using the research to inform what we do, but also considering the context, the uniqueness of the organisation, and our professional judgment in determining the approach we need to make. Using only the research often sidelines practitioner knowledge and wrongly assumes that what works in one organisation will work in another. In closing, I believe our challenge now is to make sure we're clear on what organisations are hoping to achieve through investing in employee resilience. What are their specific challenges and what behaviour changes do they need to thrive? We need to move beyond the hype cycle and quick fix to addressing the issues being faced. All this involves the application of good organisation development theory and taking a systemic approach which goes beyond a focus on individuals. This will be the focus of the next video in my series on work resilience. In the meantime, please join me in sharing your ideas on how to build resilient workforces.